Now, Jupiter in relation to Bitcoin is particularly interesting. So this leads to the 2008 credit crunch, which is when Satoshi Nakamoto writes the Bitcoin paper, the Bitcoin white paper, in sort of Halloween of 2008. So that's October, 31st of October 2008. And this is followed by the mining of the first block in January 2009. Now, what's so fascinating about this timing is that he mines the first block on the 3rd of January 2009, just days before Jupiter ingresses into Aquarius, which is where Jupiter currently we find Jupiter now. So there's this fascinating link between events, astrological events back in 2009 and what's kind of happening now. So the Bitcoin chart already sort of has this kind of signature built into it. So if you are familiar with the Bitcoin chart, you know that it's got Leo rising and Aquarius setting, and that this kind of ascendant descendant axis reflects the themes of kind of sovereignty and sort of freedom on one hand, but also the kind of the diametric opposition between kind of fiat currency as represented by the king, the regent, who can be a tyrant, and who rules often, who kind of gets the position to, or the sort of permission to rule through birth, so not necessarily through merit, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, Aquarius, which is more about sort of egalitarianism, the brotherhood of man, and of altruism, sort of so the kind of humanitarian sort of movement, which many see Bitcoin as kind of enabling, if you like. And these are themes which are enshrined also in events like the French Revolution and then in the American Constitution, which I cover in some of my articles again on the Astro Insights blog, particularly in relation to the November 2020 election and the inauguration of Joe Biden. So if you're interested in those themes, I cover them quite extensively in those articles, which you can find on the Astro Insights blog. But if we fast forward to 2020, so this is when Bitcoin had its Jupiter return, which is considered to be a very auspicious time, and it coincides with age 12, which is in many traditions when men in particular, when boys become men. So if you think about, for example, in the Jewish tradition, you have this idea of the bar mitzvah. And so this coincided with the first major kind of euphoric rise in price for Bitcoin, and we had like new all-time highs, and also widespread mainstream adoption by Bitcoin by institutions and organizations like Square and I think Visa and a couple of others. So this is the first time ever that we had kind of institutional adoption, or kind of and much more widespread or mainstream adoption, moving into what we later saw as countries adopting Bitcoin as a currency, later on in 2021. But this began at around about the Jupiter return, which coincided with, as I said, that grand conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, and also the winter solstice of 2020, so the 21st of December 2020, which is, of course, as I say, if you think the summer solstice or the June solstice, particularly in the northern hemisphere, marks the peak of light and then the point of decline, and the opposite is true of the December, the winter solstice. It's the point where the sun reaches its lowest declination, it's the darkest in the northern hemisphere, and the sun starts to then climb. That's why it's associated with the ingress of the sun into the sign of Capricorn, which is the mountain goat, the goat which climbs up the mountain. So this is the aspirant sort of entrepreneur, or somebody who wants to succeed. It's the goat, the sort of the greatest of all time, the person who starts from the bottom and works their way up to the top gradually through sheer grit and determination and hard work. So this is I think associated. We need to see this kind of solstice as being another tipping point, if you like, when we move from kind of darkness and back into light. So this certainly was true of December 2020, when we began a new 20-year cycle, and we had this this beautiful kind of catalyst which took Bitcoin to sort of new all-time highs. And then what's so fascinating is that in May, so a few months later, approximately three to 5 months later, so almost one eclipse cycle, because we had the start of a new eclipse cycle in December of 2020. So in May, Bitcoin crashed, and interestingly, this coincided within a day of Jupiter changing signs. It moved from Aquarius into Pisces. It retrograded. And what I find so fascinating is if you kind of go back and you look at some of the previous instances of big market crashes, very often it is when Jupiter moves into the sign of Pisces that we have these huge market crashes. So there may be something, kind of in this that we need to sort of bear in mind as astrologers, that somehow the sign of Pisces for Jupiter is not kind of favorable. It is for Venus. Venus is exalted in Pisces, but not for Jupiter. So just something to bear in mind. Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer, which is the time of the summer solstice, so it's when the sun is at its greatest light, and of course the sun is the ruler of the Bitcoin chart. So there is a kind of a link there to this idea of fecundity, the mother, of birth, and also of the sun, and of kind of illumination and that kind of thing. So yes, and this was also the time of the major eclipses, when Jupiter was an immutable T-squared with the luminary. So it was again, like it is at this particular eclipse, it's going to be making a T-square to the sun and the moon, the luminaries, this time in a fixed T-square. So that is just something to bear in mind, that it's the same as it was in terms of aspect as the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 26th of May. Now, as we kind of as we moved into the second half of the year, what was so fascinating is that Jupiter then re-entered Aquarius on around about the 28th or 29th of July. And of course, that was a week after the B-Word conference, when Bitcoin started to move up again. It started to recover in terms of price. It flipped bullish again after its mid-cycle slump. Fast forward now to eclipse season 2.0, which this particular eclipse sets in motion. And we are, of course, approaching Sagittarius season, which is when the sun ingresses into Sagittarius, and that happens on the 22nd of November this year. So in other words, within 3 days of this eclipse. And then moving into December, as I said, Jupiter is approaching its conjunction to the Bitcoin Venus, which is very, very bullish. But it first has to change signs, and this is, I think, where we have to be a little bit careful. So it will enter Pisces just before that. And as I said, there is a long history of market crashes very close to when Jupiter enters or ingresses into Pisces. If we look at 1927, 1928, these are the periods when Jupiter was previously in Pisces, that correlates to major market crashes. So 1927, 1928, and of course we had that huge crash in 1929, 1930, 1974, 1975, when we had stagflation, 1986, 1987, which was just before we had the kind of the yuppie kind of crash, and then again in 1998, 1999, which preceded the 2001 tech bubble and then crash. So it's really worth kind of bearing in mind kind of Jupiter cycles, as I say, because they do coincide quite strongly with the 20-year cycles in the finance markets, with its connection or its movements in relation to Saturn. And of course Saturn is also coming up to a square to Uranus, so another hard aspect, and Uranus is very important in the Bitcoin chart. So a lot of indications that we perhaps need to be a little bit careful as we move into late December, that it's possible that we might have something unexpected, some sort of anomaly, some kind of black swan event, which might interrupt or delay the top of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin bull market. And as I said, secondly, Venus is going to retrograde on the 19th of December. Venus being the wealth maker, I think this is going to be very important because it is approaching the Bitcoin sun. So that's going to be from the 19th of December to the 28th of January 2022. So it's going to stop Venus short of, first of all, making contact to the Bitcoin Jupiter, but also the Bitcoin sun. So I think delaying possibly the top until 2022.